In the early days of humanity's journey into space, everything felt new and full of hope. People had finally reached the stars after centuries of dreaming. Planets that once looked like shining dots in the sky were now home to humans. The colonies were small but full of life, each one trying to build a better future far from Earth. Scientists, workers, and families all believed that this was a new beginning. Wars on Earth had finally ended, and people promised never to repeat the same mistakes. There was peace, fragile but real. One of the brightest colonies was Venera 9. It was a green world filled with rivers, forests, and wide open skies. Children played under twin suns and settlers planted their flags with pride. The colony had schools, farms, and even art centers. It was more than just a base. It was a symbol of how far humans had come. But peace never lasts long when the universe is full of eyes watching from the dark. The Karn Dominion saw humanity as nothing more than an insect crawling out of its cradle. The Karn were an ancient alien empire, proud and ruthless. For centuries, they had ruled dozens of worlds through fear. When they learned that humans were expanding, they saw it as an insult. To them, humans were too emotional, too chaotic, too weak to survive among the stars. Their leaders believed that humanity would either bow or burn. The attack came without warning. One quiet night, as Venera 9's people slept under the glowing moons, the skies turned red. Karn warships entered orbit, their weapons raining fire on the cities below. There were no demands, no messages, no mercy. Within hours, the colony that once sang with life turned into smoke and ashes. Communication lines were cut, defenses shattered, and the surface became a graveyard. A single distress call managed to escape the destruction. A young technician named Mira had stayed behind in the comms tower, trying to send a warning to Earth. Her voice was full of fear but also strength. She said, "This is Venera 9. They are burning everything. Please, someone hear us." The signal cut off mid-sentence, replaced by static. That broken message would change the course of human history. When Earth received the transmission, the world stopped. Every news channel played it. Every radio, every screen, every network echoed Mira's voice before it vanished into silence. People froze in horror. Parents who had sent their children to the colonies fell to their knees. The governments of Earth gathered in emergency meetings. Some wanted to open peace talks immediately, believing the Karn could be reasoned with. Others demanded action. For the first time in 100 years, humanity argued not about politics or power, but about survival itself. But when the first images of Venera 9 reached Earth, a planet covered in fire, its cities reduced to black scars, the debate ended. It was no longer about strategy or diplomacy. It became personal. Everyone saw the burned schools, the destroyed hospitals, the children's toys lying in the dust. The sight awakened something deep and ancient inside the human heart. The leaders of Earth came together in a single moment of unity that history would never forget. Nations that once fought each other now stood side by side. Old enemies shook hands. Engineers, scientists, and soldiers all came forward with one purpose: to defend humanity and ensure no one would ever repeat what had been done to Venera 9. The space yards of Mars, Luna and Titan began to glow with new life. Thousands of ships were being built or repurposed. Cargo vessels were fitted with armor. Mining ships were turned into destroyers. Even small scout crafts were armed with weapons. Factories worked without rest. People volunteered not for glory but for revenge and justice. The galaxy had seen human compassion before, but now it saw what compassion turned into when it was betrayed. Admiral Elias Roon was the man chosen to lead. He was an old soldier who had fought in Earth's last war and had sworn never to fight again. He had lost his wife and son in those dark years and had spent the rest of his life teaching peace. But when he saw the Venera 9 broadcast, his hands trembled with fury. He knew then that peace could not exist without protection. He came out of retirement and took command of what would soon be called the greatest fleet humanity had ever assembled. People whispered his name with respect and fear. He wasn't a man of speeches. He was a man of silence and action. When he walked through the shipyards, workers saluted him with tears in their eyes. Everyone understood that they were building more than ships. They were building a promise. A promise that humanity would never again be helpless. As the fleet grew, something else happened across the planets. Artists painted war memorials even before the battle began. Children drew pictures of soldiers in shining armor. Scientists created new technologies out of desperation. Humanity was not fighting just to win, it was fighting to remember. Still, there was fear. No one knew how powerful the Karn really were. Some believed humanity was marching toward its own destruction, but no one dared to turn back. Too much had been lost already. Too many ghosts were waiting for justice. In the quiet nights before departure, the shipyards fell silent and people looked up at the stars. Mothers whispered prayers for their children who would go to war. Old veterans placed medals from past battles on the walls, hoping for strength. The air was heavy with grief, but also something stronger: resolve. When the first fleet took formation above Earth, millions watched from below. The sky filled with ships so vast and bright that it looked like another constellation being born. They weren't just machines. They were symbols of unity, of pain, and of love twisted into iron. The people called them the Death Fleet. Not because they worshipped death, but because they had already made peace with it. The Karn had expected surrender. They had expected humans to beg for mercy, but they didn't understand humanity. Mercy was for those who deserved it. The people of Earth had always shown compassion to those in need, but they had also learned that compassion had limits. When pushed beyond those limits, humanity became something else entirely. And so the silence before the storm grew heavy. The fleet waited for orders, engines glowing like beating hearts. Soldiers stood ready at their stations, staring at the empty black of space where their enemy hid. Some whispered the names of loved ones. Others closed their eyes and thought of home. Admiral Rune stood on the bridge of his flagship, Saul's Wrath, looking out at the endless horizon. In his hand he held a small photograph, his wife and son smiling under an old earth tree. He whispered softly, "This time I'll protect them all." Far across the stars, the Karn Dominion prepared for their next conquest, unaware that they had awakened something they could never control. They believed humans were fragile. They thought humanity's kindness was weakness. But in the quiet before war, as the Death Fleet's engines began to hum, the universe would soon learn the truth. Humanity's kindness was their strength, and their rage was unstoppable. The signal came through. One final message from Earth Command. For Venera 9, for every life lost. The fleet's engines flared brighter than the sun. One by one, ships disappeared into the dark, leaving behind a world united by grief, burning with vengeance and ready to change the stars forever. The silence before the storm was over. Humanity was coming, and the galaxy would never forget what was about to happen. When the fleet was first formed, the people called it a rescue mission. Everyone believed they were going to save whoever was left on Venera 9. Families held on to hope that maybe some survivors were hiding underground, waiting for help to come. But when the scouts finally returned with the truth, that hope died. The colony was gone. No one had survived. The cities were ashes, the forests burned to dust, and the silence on the planet was endless. There were no voices left, no signals, no signs of life. Humanity had not just lost a colony, it had lost its innocence. The news spread across the solar system like a cold wind. People stopped calling it a rescue. They began calling it vengeance. What had started as Operation Haven, meant to bring peace, was renamed by the Terran Command to Operation Retribution. The new name said everything. Humanity was done asking for mercy. Now it was time for the Karn to understand what they had created. In the command center, Admiral Elias Rune stood before the massive holographic display of the galaxy. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady. Around him stood generals, engineers, and scientists from every nation. "We are not fighting for power," he said quietly. "We are fighting for memory. For every life they took, we will answer." His words spread like fire. Across every colony and station, people began to move with purpose. Shipyards turned into fortresses of creation. Old cargo freighters were stripped down and rebuilt with armor and plasma cannons. Mining ships that once dug for minerals were now armed with railguns and torpedoes. Even research vessels were modified to carry soldiers. Humanity didn't have the technology or the numbers of the Karn, but they had something stronger: determination. Everywhere, people volunteered. Young pilots from Mars, engineers from Europa, farmers from Earth who had never seen the stars, all offered their skills. They didn't care about pay or rank. They wanted justice. Some of them knew they might never come back, but that didn't stop them. "If not us, then who?" one pilot said in an interview before boarding her ship. Those words became a slogan painted on the sides of hundreds of vessels. In the factories of Titan, women worked 20-hour shifts, building engines with their bare hands. On the moon, children collected scrap metal to donate to the fleet. Even prisoners were offered freedom if they joined the construction teams. It was as if the entire human race had turned into one great machine, fueled by grief and pride. Admiral Rune moved among them quietly. He didn't give long speeches. He didn't shout. He would simply place a hand on a worker's shoulder or nod to a young soldier. That was enough. Everyone who met him felt his calm strength. He had once been known as the man who stopped wars, but now he was the man leading one. Inside, he carried the weight of millions of souls. He knew that the path ahead would be bloody, but he also knew it was necessary. As the fleet took shape, it grew larger than anyone had imagined. Thousands of ships filled the orbit around Mars and Earth. Each one was different, some small and fast, others massive and heavy with weapons. The engineers joked that the fleet looked like a junkyard, but no one laughed for long. Every ship had a story. Some had been family transports, some old mining rigs, and some brand new warships built for this very purpose. Together, they became something terrifying. The press named it the Death Fleet. At first, the government tried to avoid that name, saying it sounded too dark. But the soldiers embraced it. "We are already dead," one of them said during an interview. "We're just making sure they join us." That phrase spread across every ship like a battle cry. The name stuck. Humanity no longer hid behind words like peace or diplomacy. This time they were sending death to those who had earned it. Training began on every level. Young recruits learned how to fly, how to fight, and how to survive in the emptiness of space. Some had never seen combat before, but they learned fast. In the cold vacuum, mistakes meant death. They practiced until their hands bled and their voices cracked. The commanders were merciless, not out of cruelty, but because they knew the enemy would be worse. While the fleet prepared, the Karn watched from afar. Their spies sent messages back to their leaders mocking humanity's efforts. "They build ships like children playing with toys," one report said. The Karn believed that humans were too emotional, too soft. They thought the Death Fleet was a bluff. They were wrong. On Earth, the nights were restless. People stayed awake to watch the glowing lines of ships in the sky. Some prayed, others cried. Families said goodbye without knowing if they would ever see their loved ones again. The old songs of peace were replaced by the humming of engines and the rhythm of metal striking metal. Humanity was changing, shedding its innocence for something harder and sharper. One evening, as the fleet neared completion, Admiral Rune walked through the main hangar of the flagship Soul's Wrath. The ship was enormous, a masterpiece of steel and fury. Its walls were painted black, its engines brighter than any star. Engineers saluted as he passed. He stopped for a moment, watching a group of soldiers loading supplies. They were laughing, telling stories, pretending not to be afraid. He smiled slightly, though his eyes were sad. He knew that laughter was their shield against the fear of what lay ahead. Later that night, he stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the dark space beyond. He opened a small box and took out a letter written by his wife many years ago. The paper was worn and faded, but her words were clear. "Promise me, Elias, you'll never stop protecting them." He folded it carefully and placed it next to the photo of his family. "I promise," he whispered. As the final ships joined the formation, the scale of humanity's power became clear. From the frozen moons of Jupiter to the orbit of Earth, thousands of vessels stood ready. Their lights formed a glowing path across the void, like a scar drawn across the stars. It was not the fleet of a conquering empire. It was the fleet of a wounded species that had learned how to fight back. Before the fleet departed, there was one final gathering. Every commander, every pilot, every engineer watched the same transmission. Admiral Rune appeared on every screen, his face calm and resolute. "They came for our children," he said. "They burned our homes. They thought we would beg for mercy. But humanity does not beg, we endure, and when the time comes, we answer." His voice was soft but carried like thunder. When he finished, the silence that followed was filled with unspoken rage and pride. And so the Death Fleet was born, not out of hatred, but out of love, twisted by loss. It was the love of parents for their children, of friends for each other, of a species for its home. Humanity was not fighting because it wanted to destroy. It was fighting because it could not allow evil to stand unchallenged. The Karn had expected fear, but they would face something far worse. Hope turned into fire. As the engines of thousands of ships roared to life, the stars seemed to tremble. From every colony, people watched their heroes rise into the sky. Old men saluted. Children waved flags. The ground shook with the sound of engines, and for a moment the whole human race seemed to breathe as one. The countdown began. 10 seconds before the jump to Karn space, soldiers whispered prayers, pilots gripped their controls, and commanders stared into the void. When the final second came, Admiral Rune gave the order. The Death Fleet vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a silent Earth glowing under the starlight. No one spoke. No one cheered. They all knew what this meant. Humanity had crossed a line. There was no going back. Far away in the cold corners of the galaxy, the Karn waited for another weak plea for mercy. What they didn't know was that mercy was gone. Humanity was coming, and they were bringing the storm with them. When the Death Fleet entered the Karn Dominion's territory, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The darkness of space stretched endlessly before them, cold and silent, but every ship in the fleet burned with purpose. For the first time in history, humanity had left its borders not to explore but to punish. The fleet moved as one, a wall of metal and fire gliding through the void. Inside every ship there was tension, fear, and something stronger, determination. At first the Karn didn't believe what they were seeing. Their scanners picked up human ships entering their border systems, and they laughed. They expected a small army, a desperate attempt to fight back. But as the Death Fleet's true size became clear, thousands of vessels armed and ready, the laughter faded. The Karn sent a message not of fear but arrogance. Their transmission echoed across space, cold and cruel. We expected mercy. You humans always talk of compassion. For a moment, the command bridge of Sol's Wrath was silent. Then Admiral Rune gave his answer. He turned to the communications officer and said, "Send this back." His voice was steady, filled with quiet fury. The officer nodded and transmitted a simple message. "You came for mercy. You'll find none here." That was the moment humanity stopped being the victim. The first battle happened at the edge of the Dorsian Belt, a region filled with asteroids and broken moons. The Karn fleet waited there, confident and proud. They had more ships, bigger cannons, and centuries of battle experience. But what they didn't have was the heart that burned inside every human soldier. When the Death Fleet arrived, the battle began instantly. The Karn opened fire, filling space with beams of plasma and trails of missiles. Explosions painted the darkness red. But the human ships didn't break formation. They moved with a strange, terrible rhythm, as if they had practiced this dance of death for centuries. Every time a human ship fell, 2 more took its place. Admiral Rune stood at the center of chaos, watching the battle unfold on his tactical screen. His orders were calm and precise. Alpha Wing, target their carriers. Beta Wing, cover the transports. No retreat. His voice echoed through thousands of channels. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. And because of that, no one else did either. On the front lines, Captain Mira Dane, named after the woman whose message had sparked the war, led a squadron of fighter ships. She was young but fierce, her eyes cold as she locked onto enemy ships. Her fighter dived between explosions, weaving through debris. She remembered her mother's voice before she left Earth, telling her to be brave. Now bravery was all she had left. "For Venera 9, she whispered every time she fired her weapons. The battle lasted 3 long days. By the end of it, the stars were littered with wreckage. Hundreds of ships burned in silence, drifting through the void. The Karn had lost half their fleet, and for the first time in centuries they retreated. The humans had done what no other species had ever managed. They had broken the pride of the Dominion. When the transmission of victory reached Earth, people didn't cheer. They cried. Reporters who once doubted the mission now spoke with awe. Families who had lost everything watched the broadcast of soldiers saluting their fallen comrades in zero gravity. The galaxy had seen many wars, but never one like this. Humanity didn't fight for power or conquest. They fought for memory, for the ghosts that still whispered from the ashes of Venera 9. After the battle, the Death Fleet didn't rest. The engineers repaired the damaged ships while the soldiers buried their dead in space. The funerals were quiet. The bodies were released into the stars, their names transmitted through every channel one by one. It took hours to finish reading them all. Admiral Rune listened to every single name. When the last one was spoken, he whispered, "You are not forgotten." But the Karn were not done either. They regrouped, gathering reinforcements from deeper within their territory. Their leaders, furious and humiliated, ordered a counterattack. They called humanity the infection that must be erased. Whole fleets began to move toward the Death Fleet's position. When the scouts brought the news to Admiral Rune, he didn't flinch. "Then we'll cut them out before they spread," he said. He ordered the fleet to move forward instead of retreating. His officers were shocked. "Sir," one of them said, "if we go deeper, we might not come back." Rune looked at him and replied, "If we stop now, they'll come for Earth next. We end it here." The Death Fleet advanced again, moving through one star system after another. Every time they entered a new world, the Karn tried to stop them, and every time they failed. The humans fought like no one had ever seen before. They didn't fight with hatred, they fought with purpose. They weren't just soldiers, they were avengers. In the midst of battle, strange friendships were formed. Miners fought beside scientists, young recruits beside old veterans. Every crew member had a story. Some had lost their families. Some had seen their cities burn. Some had never known peace. But together they became something unstoppable. One night, as the fleet drifted between stars, the soldiers gathered in the observation decks. They looked at the stars and talked quietly. A young engineer asked Admiral Rune, "Sir, do you think we'll ever go home?" Rune didn't answer at first. Then he said softly, "We'll go home when it's safe for everyone to sleep under the same sky." The battles that followed grew bloodier. The Death Fleet struck at communication hubs, supply lines, and weapon depots. Each victory came at a heavy price. Ships exploded, crews vanished, but the fleet pressed on. Whenever they lost a ship, the others kept moving forward. Humanity refused to stop. Even the enemy began to fear them. Karn soldiers whispered stories of human ships that fought until their reactors went cold, refusing to surrender. They called them the ghosts of vengeance. The Karn finally sent another message. It was broadcast across the war zone. Their voice was colder this time, edged with fear. "You have made your point," it said. "You are brave, but you are few. Leave now, and we will spare your homeworld." Admiral Rune stood before the screen, his face unreadable. "Spare?" he repeated. "You talk of mercy after killing billions?" He turned to his officers and said, "Send them silence." The communication line was cut. The Death Fleet's only reply was the flash of their engines as they moved toward the heart of the Karn Dominion. As the fleet approached the enemy's capital world, the soldiers began writing letters. Some recorded messages for their families. Others left behind words of courage for whoever might survive. No one said it out loud, but they all knew this might be the end. Yet none of them regretted being there. They had already made peace with death long ago. Admiral Rune spent those final nights walking through the ship's corridors. He stopped to speak with the crew, listening to their stories. A mechanic told him about his daughter on Earth. A pilot showed him a charm she kept for luck. Rune carried those memories with him like armor. He knew he wasn't leading just an army. He was leading the last stand of humanity's spirit. When the fleet finally reached the outer defense ring of Vornak Prime, the enemy capital space seemed to glow with fire. Dozens of Karn fleets were waiting. It was a trap, but Rune didn't turn back. "We end this now," he said. The soldiers nodded, their eyes hard with resolve. Before the final battle began, Admiral Rune sent one last message to Earth. His voice was calm but heavy. "If you hear this, know that we fought for you. Not for power, not for revenge, but so that your children can sleep without fear. Tell them we were not monsters. Tell them we remembered." Then the transmission ended, and the Death Fleet charged into battle. The sky around Vornak Prime exploded into chaos. Beams of energy cut across the void. Ships collided, shields shattered, and engines burned. The Death Fleet fought like a storm that refused to die. Every explosion lit the darkness brighter than any star. The galaxy watched in silence, unable to look away. And through all of it, Admiral Rune stood on the bridge of Sol's wrath, unshaken. He had become more than a man. He was the voice of humanity's fury and love, the fire that would burn until the stars went out. By the end of the third day, the enemy was broken. The Karn's fleets were in ruins. Their leaders fled. And for the first time in their long history, they felt something new, fear of the humans they had once mocked. The galaxy would remember that day forever. The day Mercy died and humanity rose to become something the stars would never forget. The Death Fleet reached Vornak Prime, the heart of the Karn Dominion, after months of endless fighting. The road to this final battle had been carved with blood and sacrifice. Thousands of ships had been lost, and millions of brave souls were now part of the Silent Stars. But even in their exhaustion, the remaining soldiers of humanity refused to stop. They had come too far to turn back. This was not just another fight. This was the end of everything, the war, the pain, and the fear. Either humanity would stand victorious or it would vanish from the stars forever. As the fleet arrived in orbit around Vornak Prime, the planet looked like a monstrous jewel. Its surface glowed red with molten rivers, and its skies shimmered with storms of fire. It was a world that perfectly mirrored the nature of its rulers, beautiful but cruel. Around it hung the largest armada ever assembled by the Karn Dominion. Thousands of warships surrounded their homeworld like a shield of death. They had learned their lesson from the previous defeats. This time they would not underestimate humanity. Admiral Elias Rune stood on the command deck of Sol's Wrath, staring at the enemy formation. His face was calm, though his heart was heavy. He knew that the fleet behind him was smaller now, barely half its original size. Many of the captains he had once spoken to were gone, their ships reduced to drifting wrecks somewhere among the stars. Still, the fleet waited silently, ready for his command. "Open the transmission," Rune said. His voice was low, but it carried across the bridge. The communications officer activated the link, and Rune's message was broadcast to the entire Karn fleet. "This is Admiral Elias Rune of the Terran Death Fleet," he said. "You came to our home with fire and called it justice. You slaughtered our children and called it strength. Now you face the fire you created. Humanity offers you no surrender and no mercy. Today we finish this." When the message ended, there was a moment of quiet across the battlefield. Then, without warning, the Karn opened fire. The sky exploded. Beams of light brighter than suns tore through the void. The first volley hit the forward human ships, shaking them like toys in a storm. Dozens were destroyed in seconds. But the Death Fleet did not fall apart. They responded with every weapon they had. Missiles streaked through space like falling stars, striking the enemy lines. The shockwaves rolled across the system. Space itself seemed to burn. Inside the ships, chaos reigned. Alarms blared, bulkheads shook, and the screams of the wounded filled the air. Yet no one ran. No one gave up. Every soldier knew this was their last fight. Aboard the carrier Valiant Dawn, Commander Kara was bleeding from a wound on her forehead, but she refused to leave her post. "Keep firing," she shouted. "As long as we breathe, we fight." Her crew obeyed, even as the ship's hull cracked under the strain. Admiral Rune's flagship, Sol's Wrath, led the central line. Enemy ships surrounded them from all sides. His officer shouted updates. "Shields down to 40%. Rear engines failing." But Rune didn't move from his place. His eyes stayed locked on the holographic display of the battlefield. "Hold the line," he said quietly. "We're not dying here." Not yet. Then came the second wave. The Karn unleashed their planet's surface cannons, massive weapons capable of piercing through even the strongest shields. Each shot tore holes through the human formation. One of the blasts struck a medical transport ship carrying hundreds of wounded soldiers. The explosion lit up the darkness like a small sun. Everyone on the bridge of Sol's Wrath fell silent as they watched the light fade away. Run's hands clenched into fists. He turned to his crew. "Focus all remaining batteries on those cannons. If we fall, we take them with us." The human ships dove toward the planet, weaving through storms of fire. Fighters screamed through the chaos, firing torpedoes into the enemy lines. Every explosion felt like a heartbeat. For every Terran ship that fell, 2 Karn vessels followed it into the abyss. It was no longer just a battle. It was madness, fury, and courage all tangled together. Down on Vornak Prime, the skies turned red with the light of war. The capital city, a sprawling fortress of glass and steel, trembled as pieces of the battle rained down from orbit. The Karn leaders watched from their towers, fear in their eyes for the first time. They had thought humanity weak. Now they saw the truth. They had awakened a storm they could never control. In the middle of the chaos, Admiral Rune's ship was hit by a barrage of plasma fire. The deck shook violently and sparks flew from the consoles. "We've lost engine control," the helmsman shouted. "We're falling into the planet's gravity." Rune looked around. He saw the fear in his crew's eyes, but also their resolve. They were ready to die if it meant victory. "Then we'll take them down with us," he said softly. "All batteries prepare for orbital strike." The officers hesitated. One of them, a young lieutenant, whispered, "Sir, that will destroy the planet." Rune nodded. "I know. But if we don't end it now, they'll rebuild. They'll come for Earth again. This ends here. Outside, the ship's hull began to glow as it entered the atmosphere. Flames licked at its surface, and the world below grew larger and brighter. The crew worked furiously, locking in the firing coordinates. Every weapon on the ship turned toward the planet. Across the fleet, captains received Rune's final command: target the capital. All ships, coordinate orbital strike. For humanity. For Venera 9. The message spread like a heartbeat across every channel. One by one, the ships aligned their cannons. Even the heavily damaged ones joined in. As Sol's wrath plunged toward the surface, Admiral Rune stood tall. He took out the photo of his wife and son, kissed it gently, and placed it on the console. "I'm coming home," he whispered. Then he gave the order. Fire. The sky exploded again, but this time it was not the Karn's doing. The Death Fleet unleashed its fury. Thousands of beams of light struck the planet at once. The ground shook, mountains split apart, and oceans boiled. The fire spread across the surface in waves of destruction. The capital city vanished in an instant, reduced to dust and memory. The shockwave reached into space, scattering debris and tearing apart the remaining Karn ships. When the light faded, Vornak Prime was silent. The once proud homeworld of the Karn Dominion had become a grave. On the surviving ships, the crews watched in awe and sorrow. Many of them were crying, not from joy but from grief. They had won, but the cost was unbearable. Of the 200 ships that had once made up the Death Fleet, only 147 remained. The others were gone, lost in the inferno. No one knew what had happened to Admiral Rune. His ship, Sol's Wrath, had disappeared in the explosion. The last transmission received from him was a short, broken message. "Mercy is earned through honor. You showed none. Humanity remembers." When the remaining fleet began its journey back home, space was filled with the wreckage of both sides. Pieces of ships drifted through the void, silent witnesses to the war that had shaken the stars. The soldiers who survived carried with them the weight of what they had seen. They were heroes, but they didn't feel like ones. They had seen too much death, lost too many friends. As the fleet moved away from the burning remains of Vornak Prime, a strange calm filled the air. The radio channels were quiet for the first time in months. There were no more orders, no more screams, no more signals from the enemy, just silence. And in that silence, every soldier understood what it meant. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the victory tasted like ashes. When the fleet finally vanished into the darkness of space, one last fragment of Sol's Wrath drifted among the ruins. It was a single piece of metal burned and broken, carrying a single inscription on its side. For those we lost. For those we loved. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Karn Dominion was gone, and the legend of the Death Fleet had been born. But in the quiet of the stars, the story was not one of triumph, but of remembrance. For the fire that had destroyed a world had also burned into history a message that would echo forever. Humanity could forgive many things, but never the destruction of its own. The war was finally over. The stars that had once echoed with the thunder of battle were now quiet, their silence both peaceful and heavy. The Death Fleet returned home, but it was not the same as when it had left. The ships that had once been filled with thousands of brave soldiers now carried only a few. Many of the bunks were empty, the halls quiet. Every survivor carried invisible scars, memories that no medicine could heal. They had won a war that no one believed they could, but the cost of victory was beyond imagination. As the surviving ships entered Earth's orbit, the planet below looked like a blue jewel floating in the dark. For many, it was the first time they had seen it in years. Some wept silently, unable to speak as they gazed at the home they had fought so hard to protect. They had gone to the edges of the galaxy and faced horrors beyond words, but now, finally, they were home. Yet inside their hearts, a strange emptiness lingered. When the ships landed, the survivors were greeted with cheers and tears. The people of Earth celebrated them as heroes, the saviors of humanity. Cities lit up in their honor, and children carried flags with the symbol of the Death Fleet. But the soldiers who stepped off those ships did not feel like heroes. They smiled, they waved, but their eyes told another story. They remembered the screams, the fire, and the faces of those who never returned. Commander Kara was one of the first to walk down the ramp. Her uniform was torn, her face lined with exhaustion. Reporters surrounded her, asking how it felt to be a hero. She said nothing at first, only looked up at the sky. "It doesn't feel like victory," she finally whispered. "It feels like survival." The government built monuments for the fallen, enormous walls of metal engraved with thousands of names. Families came to touch the names of their lost loved ones, leaving flowers and letters at the base. The air around those monuments was filled with both pride and sorrow. People spoke softly there, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the dead. Among the names on the wall was Admiral Elias Roon. His ship had never been found, and his body was lost forever in the ruins of Vornak Prime. But his name shone at the top of the list, carved deeper than the rest. The stories of his final moments spread across the world. People said he went down with his ship, refusing to flee while others still fought. Some said his last act was to guide the fleet's final strike. No one knew the truth, but everyone believed one thing. He had died as he lived, fearless. In the months that followed, humanity began to rebuild. The factories that had once produced weapons now built ships for exploration. The same engineers who had designed engines of war turned their talents to healing the damage done. But even as the world tried to move forward, the shadow of the war remained. Entire colonies had been wiped out. Many planets were still in ruins, their surfaces scarred by battle. It would take generations to repair all that had been lost. The survivors of the Death Fleet became symbols of hope, yet many of them could not find peace. Some retired quietly, living in small towns far from the cities. Others joined reconstruction efforts, trying to give meaning to what they had endured. Commander Kara became an instructor at the Space Academy, teaching new cadets not about glory, but about the cost of war. Her lectures were calm and honest. She often told her students, "War is not about who wins. It's about who survives to remember." One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Kara stood by the memorial wall. The sky burned with golden light and the waves carried the sound of the wind. She placed her hand on Admiral Roon's name and closed her eyes. She could still hear his voice in her memory, the calm command, the quiet strength. "For humanity, for Venera 9. That phrase had become part of history now, repeated in songs, carved into statues, and remembered by every generation. But to Kara it was more than a legend. It was a promise. Far beyond Earth, the ruins of Vornak Prime still floated in silence. The planet was gone, reduced to a field of drifting rocks and ash. But deep among the debris, something remained, a fragment of a ship's hull, marked with the Terran symbol. Sometimes passing traders reported seeing faint signals from that region, short bursts of static almost like a heartbeat. Most dismissed it as radiation noise. But some whispered that it was a message, a ghost of the Death Fleet still out there guarding the stars. Decades passed. Humanity entered a new era. The United Colonies that had once been divided by politics and pride now stood together. The memory of the war had taught them what division could cost. They began exploring beyond known space, not as conquerors but as seekers. New worlds were found. And for the first time in history, humanity looked outward not in fear, but in hope. And yet, even as the years went by, the legend of the Death Fleet grew stronger. Children learned about it in school. Old veterans told stories of the day when humanity stood alone against the darkness and did not break. The fleet had been forged from pain and rage, but it had also shown what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. Not just destruction, but courage, unity, and sacrifice. In one of the colonies near the Orion Belt, a young cadet named Roon Kara was born, named after the two heroes of the war. She grew up hearing stories of the admiral and the commander, how they had fought not for glory but for the right of their people to live free. On her 16th birthday, she visited the Great Museum on Mars, where the last remaining pieces of the Death Fleet were preserved. Among them was a fragment of Sol's Wrath, blackened by heat but still bearing the words engraved by its captain. "For those we lost, for those we loved." She stood in front of it for a long time, tracing the letters with her fingertips. "I'll make sure they're never forgotten," she whispered. In the centuries that followed, humanity became one of the leading civilizations in the galaxy. The name Terran came to mean something powerful, not just in strength, but in spirit. Other races remembered the war with fear and respect. The phrase "they expected mercy." Humanity sent a Death Fleet became a warning written in the histories of countless worlds. It was said with awe, a reminder that humans were not monsters, but they were not weak either. When pushed too far, they could become a storm. But among humans, the story meant something deeper. It was not a tale of revenge, but of endurance. It reminded them that mercy must never be taken for weakness, and that peace must always be guarded because it was bought with blood. The veterans who had fought in the war were gone, but their legacy remained in every law, every alliance, and every quiet moment of peace between the stars. On Earth, the monument still stood. Over time, it became covered with new flowers, new carvings, new memories. Travelers from across the galaxy came to see it, to touch the names and read the stories. Some came to mourn, others came to understand. And one night, under the soft light of the moon, an old woman in a worn uniform stood there once more. Her hair was silver now, her body frail, but her eyes still sharp. It was Commander Kara visiting one last time. She smiled faintly, speaking to the wall as if it could hear her. "We did it, Elias. They remember. Humanity remembers." The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying her words away into the night. She stayed there until the stars came out, the same stars they had once fought beneath. Somewhere out there, she knew, were the remains of Sol's wrath still drifting in the endless dark. But in her heart, she felt that maybe, somehow, the Admiral was still watching, still guarding the peace they had fought for. When she finally turned to leave, she took one last look at the shining names and whispered, "Sleep well, my friends," and as she walked away, the monument gleamed in the starlight, a silent reminder of everything that had been lost and everything that had been saved. Humanity had come from the ashes of war and built something greater than fear. They had proven that even in their darkest hour, they could rise not because they were perfect, but because they refused to surrender. The Death Fleet was gone, but its spirit lived on in every ship that sailed the stars, in every explorer who dared to step into the unknown, and in every heart that believed in the strength of humanity. And so the story passed into legend, not just a tale of destruction, but a song of survival, courage, and unbreakable will. Long after the last soldier had faded into memory, one truth remained written across the stars themselves. Humanity had been tested by fire, and they had endured, for those they lost, for those they loved, and for the promise that they would never let the darkness win again.